This podcast has been brought to you by Seeker's Guidance, the Global Islamic Seminary. Help us spread the light of prophetic guidance to millions around the world by becoming a monthly supporter. Make a small donation at seekersguidance.org/donate. For as little as $10 a month, you can help people find life-changing guidance.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Allahumma la ilma lana illa ma 'allamtana innaka antal alimul hakim. Allahumma 'allimna ma yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima tu'allimuna wa zidna min fadlika 'ilman wa 'amalan wa qurban ya arhamar rahimin. Allahumma zidna wa la tanqusna wa akrimna wa la tuhinna wa a'tina wa la tahrimna. وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وأرضنا وارض عنا يا أرحم الراحمين ويا أكرم الأكرمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. So we looked at the start of the third juz. We looked at the discussion on the prophets, and then we returned to the discussion on spending and striving in the way of Allah, and this being the most important thing for salvation on the day of judgment, working to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And who won't survive the calamities and who won't be able to get past the difficulties? Someone who rejects God, right? So then we started Ayatul Kursi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked about what the true belief in God should be, how we should understand who and what God is. And then to continue from there, we said that the matter is clear, so there's no need to force anyone into religion. And then we looked at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how He is towards those who believe in Him. Allahu waliyul ladhina amanu. Allah is the ally, the protecting ally of those who believe, and He takes them out of the darknesses into the light. And now we have some examples of this occurring. So let's look at the next ayah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, ألم تر إلى الذي حاج إبراهيم في ربه أن آتاه الله الملك. So it's translated, are you, O Prophet, not aware of the one who argued with Abraham about his Lord because Allah had granted him kingship? إذ قال إبراهيم ربي الذي يحيي ويميت قال أنا أحيي وأميت. Right? So and remember when Abraham said, my Lord is the one who has power to give life and death, he argued, I too have the power to give life and cause death. Right? So let's look at this ayah. So the situation is that at some point in his life, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam was presented before the king of the time, and the ulama mentioned that his name was they either say with the fatha or kasra Namrud or Nimrod. In English they say Nimrod. So he's got a Fir'aun complex, which is, well, you call it a God complex, as they say, it's small g, right? And he thinks that he is divine. He thinks he has the qualities of a divine being. Just like Fir'aun said, Ana Rabbukum al-A'la, Nimrod also had this misunderstanding. So at some point, Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam was presented before him. And it seems like he was the ruler of, the areas surrounding or close to, where Sayyidina Ibrahim grew up. Allah knows best. So Sayyidina Ibrahim is, presented before him. And the ayah starts with Alam tara, and we looked at this, and it literally means, have you not seen? So what's happening here is that knowing something is being compared to seeing something, right? So it's basically saying that there's a matter that you should know about, right? Or do you not know about this matter, right? And because it's so clear and so important, is being described as though it's something visible, and the knowledge of it is as though you're seeing it. So did you not see? Alam tara, right? So don't you know about this? Like, it's something important, you should know about it, right? So he says, Alam tara ila alladhi hajja Ibrahim. And then alladhi also has a meaning of, someone who's famous for this, right? So maybe in in the time after this, this story became famous amongst Bani Israel. Allah knows best. But we're looking at Nimrod, and he says, so do you know about the one who argued Hajj Ibrahim fi Rabbihi, the one who argued and disputed with Ibrahim regarding his Lord. So fi literally means in, but what was meant here is that the topic of discussion was fi Rabbihi, right? The Lord, his Lord, whose Lord? Two positions. It could either go back to Nimrod, or the one who's arguing, or it could go back to Ibrahim, and this is stronger. So which automatically means that if it's Ibrahim's Lord, then so he's saying, you know, who's this Lord of yours, right? If we took it to mean that it's his Lord, the Lord of the king, then it would give the meaning that he's denying that he has a Lord, right? But in reality, that there is a Lord over him. So, but it means that the one who's arguing with Ibrahim regarding Ibrahim's Lord, so which also says that he's the Lord, he's the loving Lord, the carer, the protector, the one who's blessing Ibrahim. So Ibrahim is going to have support and help, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will facilitate this matter for him and look after him and get him through it in the best of ways. That's how we understand it, right? So so alam tara ila alam tara ila alladhi haja Ibrahim fi rabbih. And then the wording also says that this is not something that you understand from this, that he's doing something that's not right, not appropriate. It shouldn't be done. He's breaking rules, he's crossing boundaries that shouldn't be crossed just by getting into this matter in the first place, right? So it's strange. After we know who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. La ta'khudhuhu sinatun wala nawm. Nothing can overwhelm him, no sleep, he's in control of everything, he knows everything. And then this man's out there, with this being the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he could learn this from this prophet that stood before him. And this man's out there, having the nerve and the audacity to debate with Sayyidina Ibrahim regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there's a problem, right? And so we also see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to look after Sayyidina Ibrahim and protect him. And he's facing a taghut, وَالَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا أَوْلِيَاءُهُمُ الطَّاغُوتُ, as we saw, and he's facing one of these people. And so he says, he's debating with Ibrahim about Ibrahim's Lord, an atahu Allahul mulk, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him dominion. Isn't this strange? If someone does you a favor, gives you a big gift, what you would normally do, what not a normal person would do, he would show thanks, he would show appreciation, he'd show just how much this means to him, right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given him mulk, this dominion, and atahu Allahu al-mulk. What does this person do? Instead of doing that, what he does is he takes the gifts that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him, the political power, the the military power, he's a ruler, got subjects underneath him, there's wealth, there's status, all of these things. And instead of using this as a means of thanking Allah and showing appreciation and increasing in his manifestation of his voluntary slavehood to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what does he do? He deems himself to be God, and he actually argues with a true messenger from God, from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about about Allah. So he's basically trying to claim that he's God, right? So then the ayah continues, إِذْ قَالَ إِبْرَاهِيمُ, right? And so now there's the initial discussion, and now we're getting detail, right? So إِذْ قَالَ, recall when Ibrahim said, رَبِّيَ الَّذِي يُحْيِي وَيُمِيتُ. He said, my Lord is the one who gives life, and he keeps, the one yuhyi, keeps giving life, and he gives death. قَالَ أَنَا أُحْيِي وَأُمِيتُ. So what's being said here? So now our attention is directed towards the actual towards the actual event. So look at this, recall this, think about this. إذ قال إبراهيم يحيي ويميت. So as we said at the beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah, إذ has a meaning, look at, recall those events, right? The time of that event, and the time obviously is like a container which contains these events. So let's look at this. And then Ibrahim said, my loving Lord is the one, and Alladhi is famous for it, right? Everyone knows. You should, or it's at a stage where everyone should know and you should recognize this. Yuhyi, he gives life, and present tense he keeps doing it. So everyone that everyone and everything that comes into existence, this is from Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam. Rabbi alladhi yuhyi, keeps bringing people to life. Where you meet, and he keeps taking people's lives, right? He's the one that causes death. And it seems like it's a response to a question. So the person will have asked that, you're saying you've got a God who, besides me, who is this God, right? So Sayyidina Ibrahim, he didn't say Ilahi as well, that my God. He said my loving caring master, my loving caring Lord. So it means it has the meaning that he's this divine being, and also it's also got the reason why he's worshipping him, because he's kind to me. He bestows his favors upon me again and again and again. He's constantly looking after me. Rabbi alladhi yuhyi, he gives life. Wa yumit, and he takes life. And it's interesting that that no one else can give life, no one else can create life, right? And this is what Sayyidina Ibrahim means, that my Lord gives life. You can get as many scientists as you want, stick them in as big a lab as you want, give them all the tech that you want. They can't give life. They can't bring something which is inanimate into a state of life where it's aware, it's sentient, right? It's conscious. And but this is the affair of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Only He can do it. So what does this individual do? What does Nimrod do? Qala, so immediately he responds, Ana uhyi wa umid. I give life and I give death. Right? So he's saying that I'm the one. It's basically saying not your Lord, me. Or you could also understand I too, so basically he's saying I give life and I give death, right? And in a narration, some prisoners were brought, and both of them, sentenced to death. So one of them he pardoned, right? And one of them he had him executed. So I mean, if you use it as a metaphor, you could say metaphorically that this person who was pardoned, he was meant to die, and this king prevented that, and he allowed him to continue his natural lifespan. So it's as though he's brought him to life. Metaphorically you can use that, right? But in reality, no, because we don't worship someone for metaphors, right? It's the physical act which shows Allah's power and His dominance over everything. He gives life, He gives death. So unfortunately, this person doesn't learn the lesson from what Sayyidina Ibrahim said. So he says, I give life and I give death, which is clearly a mistake, because he doesn't, right? And the one who gives life is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so now what happens? We look at what Sayyidina Ibrahim says. قال إبراهيم فإن الله يأتي بالشمس من المشرق فأتي بها من المغرب فبهت الذي كفر والله لا يهدي القوم الظالمين. So Ibrahim challenged him. He said, Allah causes the sun to rise from the east, so make it rise from the west. And the disbeliever was dumbstruck, and Allah does not guide the wrongdoing people. So Sayyidina Ibrahim alayhi salatu wasalam, what he does is he doesn't waste his time. So clearly, this person, this Nimrod, he's got a level, of intellect. Either he's acting like, he doesn't understand Sayyidina Ibrahim's point, or he truly doesn't understand Sayyidina Ibrahim's point. So what does Sayyidina Ibrahim do, alayhi salatu wasalam? Instead of wasting time clarifying the matter, well, no, technically I'm talking in a literal sense. Allah gives life, Allah gives death, but what you did, you're saying, you gave death. Okay, you had that man killed, right? But this point of life you know, I'm not going to concede it because you didn't give him life, he was already alive, all of these points, right? But instead of wasting time on this, Sayyidina Ibrahim ascended to a higher argument, an argument in which, you know, he wasn't wasting time with this individual. And this is what you get that a lot of the time, and this is a lesson, a lot of the time when people go and if they're trying to talk to non-Muslims, you know, some of them are you know, beautiful people, fair people, and they listen to your argument, and you know, and if it's convincing, they'll accept, right? But what you see many times, especially in public debates and stuff, you know, they either play dumb or they unfortunately sometimes there's dishonesty, and you know, when talking about Islam, you know, they just misinterpret something deliberately, or present it as in a distorted form, or they'll make a joke out of something which is serious, which, you know, in literature that's something called bathos, where you make a serious point and then if you crack a joke, it undermines the seriousness of that previous point. So you know, these sorts of things, that's why in proper debates you don't make fun out of your opponent, you don't, you know, ridicule them or anything that they've said or the way they've said it or anything like this. You stick to the main argument. So so Sayyidina Ibrahim wished to avoid all of this, and let's go to an argument that will just, you know, end this discussion. So there's a lesson there. Don't waste your time on arguing, right? Firstly, don't get into a debate. Excuse me. Firstly, don't get into a debate about religion. Only if you're qualified, you know, and you've got some learning behind you, should you even do this, right? And even then, don't insult your opponent. Don't make fun of them. Go straight to the most effective means of concluding the argument and do so. That's the best way. So he says, fa, right? The fa indicates, you know, okay, as a response to that, then فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ, now he mentions the name, and now he's talking about a real, you know, the name, the supreme name, this real perfect being of absolute supreme divinity. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ, right? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala يأتي بالشمس من المشرق, that Allah brings the sun from the east. Mashriq literally shuruq, are the rays of sunshine, and so the mashriq is the place where the rays of sunshine first appear, the east. So he says, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْتِي بِالشَّمْسِ مِنَ الْمَشْرِقِ, Allah brings the sun from the east. If you're God, you bring it from the west. Because I've said God does this, and you're saying I too can do this, or I'm the one that does this. Well, if you're saying that, you know, you rival his power, okay, then, you know, it could be confusing. You know, if you say, well, I gave this man death, and then Ibrahim could have said, well, no, it's actually Allah gave him death, right? It was his time to die. You know, there could be a debate. Okay, let's clarify this. Allah makes it happen from the east. You do it from the west. You make the sun rise from the west, right? And clearly, without a doubt, this person cannot do this, right? He's unable to do this. It would involve, you know, making the earth, you know, rotate in, you know, stop and then rotate in the opposite direction. And he can't do this, right? Everyone alive together can't do this, right? It's what Allah does. And then what happens? فَبُهِتَ الَّذِي كَفَرَ. So he, the one who disbelieved and rejected and covered and hid the truth, was dumbfounded, was speechless. Basically, Sayyidina Ibrahim shut him up. He had a conclusive, undeniable argument which made sense logically, that, okay, if you're claiming divinity, I'm saying that the divine being does this, and you're saying you're the divine being, then do it. But do it in a different form, right? Prove it. And he can't, right? So the one who was disbelieving was completely dumbstruck, dumbfounded, unable to speak, unable to respond. Wallahu la yahdi al-qawm al-zalimin. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not guide to the truth, to matters which are you know, in the ultimate benefit. Who? Al-qawm al-zalimin, the wrongdoing people. And the word qawm here Also, as Imam al-Biqai mentions on many occasions, it has this a meaning of those who are skilled and adept and capable at something, right? So what they're doing is they're wronging themselves, and they've got a fair bit of skill in doing so as well, unfortunately, right? So Allahu la yahdi al-qawm al-zalimin, those who wrong themselves. How? By rejecting the truth, denying the truth, misleading people, misguiding people. A ruler, it's not just him, it's his subjects as well, right? And he's obviously going to enforce his religion, or there'll be, if there's a state religion, anyone that doesn't follow the truth because of the influence of the state, is, it's on his head, it's on the ruler's head, right? So he's a wrongdoer for wronging others, for taking them away from the deen, and he's a wrongdoer for wronging himself, putting himself in a situation where it's liable to be punished by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so this is an example of the wilayah. Allahu waliyul ladina amanu. Allah is the ally, protecting ally of those who believe, where where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helped Sayyidina Ibrahim, inspired him with the right proofs, and put him in a situation where it had where his argument was proved to be stronger, right? And gave him the wisdom, gave him the help, all of these things, right? If you reflect, there's many things. So next we look at another case of the wilayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You can say wilaya, or you can say walaya. In Surah Al-Kahf, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses it with the fatha, hunalika walayatullahi al-haq. But you can say wilaya. So now we have another situation. أو كالذي مر على قرية وهي خاوية على عروشها قال أنى يحيي هذه الله بعد موتها. So this is an atf, this is a conjunction to Alam Tara, don't you know about this, or haven't you seen this, right? And we talk about another individual. Or you're not aware of the one who passed by a city which was in ruins. He wondered, how could Allah bring this back to life after its destruction, right? So the Quran, in many a time and many a situation, the Quran does not mention names of individuals, and it does not mention names of places or times, and that is the best approach. There's one exception. He mentions prophets, but he doesn't directly address people at times, if they're not prophets. With one exception, Zayd ibn Haritha, that was in Surah Al-Kahf. That's a unique situation. But the purpose of this is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does this in order to show, firstly, to give general broad principles that apply in every situation, right? So that's an important point, especially when it comes to the sacred law. But also the point here is that we don't need extra information if the point is the lesson, right? All you need are the main details which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives. So there's no issue here. So we have all the information we need. However, many of the tafsirs have narrations from Bani Israel and other sources, and some of the mufassirs interpreted verses in their light, and some of the mufassirs just mentioned them just so that the reader knows it's out there, but they didn't interpret in those light. So in this, regarding this, I'll mention what they say, but it's not necessary. In fact, it's better to understand the verse as it is. But they say that this person, some say it was Ezekiel, a prophet was mentioned in the Bible. Allah knows best. Some say most say it was Uzair. So he was a prophet, and he was worshipped by a group of the Bani Israel. And they say that this city is Al-Quds, Jerusalem. After there was a certain point, because of the rebellion of Bani Israel, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent Bukht Nasr, who is the king Nebuchadnezzar, right? And he destroyed the city, and many Bani Israel died. So after that, years after that, the city is derelict, and but Allahu Alam, I'm not saying it is that city. I'm not saying it's either of these individuals. It's someone Allah knows best. Let's learn the lesson. أو كالذي مر على قرية and have you not right? Or like the situation. So what's happening is that the previous situation of the wilaya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being compared to this situation of the wilaya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for this other believer. That's what the kaf of comparison at tashbih here means. The one who marra ala qaryatin, he passed by a qarya. This word is metaphorical. This is a balagha really comes in when you understand what's being said. So this is majaz al-majaz al-mursal bi'tibari ma kan. So a qarya is a city which is vastly populated, right? So you have the term Medina, which is a big city, but this is a qarya, which is a city which is a lot of population. Or like like the situation of the one who passed by a city, وَهِيَ خَاوِيَةٌ عَلَى عُرُوشِهَا, and it's translated here as and which was in ruins, right? So if you look at the word literally, khawiyatun ala urushiha, collapsed in on its roof. That's what it means. So basically, if you leave buildings alone or whatever, and then eventually buildings generally four walls on the outside, and you have a roof to protect you from the rain and everything, right? And the roof is generally made out of wood. And what happens with the roof? Because it's made out of wood, it gets weaker. The rain, insects, all these things, they affect it. So the roof sometimes collapses in first, right? So the walls are usually made out of stronger stuff. They remain upright. So urush, plural of arish, which is a roof. So that collapse, that falls in, and then because that falls in, it affects the structure of the buildings, and then so the walls collapse in on top of the roof. So the roof falls khawiyatun, right? And ala urushi, that's the urush. And the walls collapse in on the roof, right? That's what this it means. Khawiyatun ala urushiha. It's used in a few places in the Quran, this expression. So he sees this, and he says, قَالَ أَنَّا يُحْيِي هَذِهِ اللَّهُ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا. He said, how on earth? Anna, compare anna to kaifa, which is just literally asking how. Kaifa, it's also, you can use it in a strong way, but anna, very strong, powerful rhetorical question. He's asking, anna yuhyi hadhihi Allahu ba'da mawtiha. How can Allah bring this to life? Allah, right? So use the supreme name. Ba'da mawtiha. Ba'da, so has this meaning here of way long after its death. So obviously the city is not dead, but he's comparing it to, which also links it back to the previous ayah about giving life and death. So it is comparing it to that it's become derelict. No one lives here. It's not it's not fit for anyone living here. How can this it just be to in his mind is far-fetched, right? So he's not denying Allah's power, but rather what he's doing, he's just he's wondering at at the scope of this thing. It's like just look how difficult it would be, right? And subhanallah. So what happens? فَأَمَاتَهُ اللَّهُ مِئَةَ عَامٍ, yeah, ثُمَّ بَعَثَ. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that Allah caused him to die for 100 years, then brought him back to life. ثُمَّ بَعَثَ. قَالَ كَمْ لَبِثْتَ قَالَ لَبِثْتُ يَوْمًا أَوْ بَعْضَ يَوْمٍ. Allah asked, how long have you remained, like here, right, in the state? He said, perhaps a day or part of a day, right? قال بل لبثت مئة عام فانظر إلى طعامك وشرابك لم يتسنه وانظر إلى حمارك. So Allah said, no, you have remained here for 100 years. Just look at your food and drink, they have not spoiled, but now look at the remains of your donkey. So what's being said? So he said, فَأَمَاتَهُ اللَّهُ. So a practical example of what we see being said by Sayyidina Ibrahim in the previous ayah. So Allah gave him death. Allah, the Supreme Being, gives that power in expression. Mi'ata amin, a whole century, right? And so the word am is also used for like a good year, right? So there was progress, there was change, there was development. People moved back in, they would have cleaned it all up, rebuilt the city. ثم بعث, and moreover, so thumma, not moreover, and then long after his initial death, 100 years is a long time. Long after that, he resurrected him. ثم بعث قال كم لبثت. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked him, how long have you stayed here? Right? How long have you been here? Right? قال لبثت يوما أو بعض يوم. Some of the narrations say that, he died early in the day, and then towards the end of the day, after 100 years, he was resurrected. So he thought, oh, it might have been part of a day. It doesn't matter. The ayah just says, so he sleeps. Sorry, he dies and then he's resurrected. But to him, because there's been no consciousness, no dreaming, nothing. So he thought, I might have just, well, he realized that he died and he's come back to life. Right? But the passing of time hasn't been obvious to him. So he says, a long time. So he says a day or part of a day, right? Or maybe, Allahu A'lam, the Mufassiru mentioned that the city was repopulated. They've got, stories, but even maybe it wasn't repopulated, right? It's just that him, and Allah gave him a practical example of, just like you can be resurrected, this whole place can be. Allahu A'lam, right? So he says, لبثت يوما أو بعض يوم, a day or part of a day, right? قال بل لبثت 100 عام. No, بل, so wrong, that's not it. You remained here 100 years. 100 عام, right? So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him proof. فانظر إلى طعامك وشرابك لم يتسنه. Oops. And so it says, look at your food and your drink. It hasn't degraded. It hasn't rotted, right? Let's just use that word. Because the word yatasanna literally comes from the word sana, which is a bad year, or just a year in general, it can be used as. So literally, you can almost translate it as time hasn't passed over it. But that's not the intended meaning. Because when time passes over something, it changes, like food would rot and all of these things. So he said, lam yatasanna, right? So it hasn't perished, it hasn't rotted, it hasn't degraded over time. That's the word, degraded, yeah. Over time. So your food and your drink. Wanzur ila himarik, and look at your donkey as well. So his donkey is that lying there as a rotten corpse, right? The skeleton. And then so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what he next does is he resurrects his donkey in front of him. But what's said before that is, he says, وَلِنَجْعَلَكَ آيَةً لِلنَّاسِ وانظر إلى العظام كيف ننشزها ثم نكسوها لحما. And look at the bones of the donkey, how we bring them together, then clothe them with flesh. فلما تبين له قال أعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير. And when this was made clear to him, he declared, now I understand, Allah is most capable of everything. Right, so what's being said? So it says, and so he's translated, وَلِنَجْعَلَكَ آيَةً لِلنَّاسِ, and so we made you into a sign for humanity. What's actually being said here is there's an implied statement, and so we could make you a sign for humanity. So you can imply a number of things, but what Abu Suud says that, we did this to show you how our power and how we can do this, how we have the ability to bring this whole unpopulated, dilapidated city back to life, right? So, and so that we could make you a sign for other people, right? And subhanallah, imagine a person that's been gone for such a long time being resurrected, and then, so maybe there were people around him, right? Maybe there were people seeing this. Allah knows how it would have been a sign beyond how it's placed in the Qur'an, but him being a sign for other people in his time, Allah knows how that manifested. And then he says, وَانظُرْ إِلَى حِمَارِ we did this. وَانظُرْ إِلَى الْعِظَامِ كَيْفَ نُنْشِزُهَا. There's two qira'at, كيف ننشرها, how we resurrect it. And كيف ننشرها, nashr is, so the Quran uses death and then resurrection, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, uses it as the example of, say, a cloth. You got a cloth lying somewhere, and then if you were to fold it over, right, that's death. And then you open it up again, that's resurrection, right? So how easy is it if you've got a cloth in front of you and you fold it over and then you unfold it? It's hardly any effort at all for us human beings, right? And for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, everything's absolutely easy, all the same. So كيف ننشرها, how we resurrect it, that's that meaning, right? And then but here in the qira'ah of Hafs and Asim, كيف ننشزها, which is basically how their bones are reconnected, restructured. So it's like they're all on the ground, they're recreated, and then and then the bones of the feet assemble, and then the shins and the kneecaps and the thighs and everything, and then all the ribs go into place, and how everything of this donkey, all the bones reassemble. Obviously he's seeing this. What a tremendous sign. كيف ننشزها ثم نكسوها لحما. And then after that, after all of this, and moreover in a more impressive way, how we clothe them with flesh. What a beautiful expression. I really like this expression. That literally it's like, like a person is undressed and then you put your clothes on, and then it's like, everything's covered, and you can, it's just beautiful, like you can dress for warmth or cold or whatever, and your body doesn't show, right? So like this, you've got the skeleton, and then it's like there's layers, right? Just like with clothing, there's layers, there's the muscles and the bones and the sinews and the tendons, and there's veins in there, then there's skin, and then there's the fur and all of this stuff. ثم نكسوها, so we clothe it in flesh, in layers upon layers. It's really beautiful. Lahman, right? So then he says, فَلَمَّا تَبَيَّنَ لَهُ, and when this matter became absolutely clear, the matter itself became clear that Allah can do this to me, my donkey, in this way, He can do this to everything. So this city is nothing, right? When this matter became clear to him, قَالَ, he said, أَعْلَمُ أَنَّ, I know. So first he had Iman, and they said وَلَيْسَ الْخَبَرُ كَالْعِيَانِ, that being told something is not the same as seeing it yourself, right? And so he believes Allah, he's a wali, he's someone who's under Allah's alliance and protection. So he believes Allah can recreate, but having a belief in this is not the same as witnessing it firsthand, right? So here it is, the wilayah of Allah, Allah looking after him, protecting him, helping him, and and it took a while, and there's a difference between the way he expressed it and the way Sayyidina Ibrahim expresses something in the next ayah, which we'll see, and we'll look at that. And what a beautiful sign, sign for him. He got certainty, and imagine, the strength of his iman after that, after seeing this, and then the other people around him, they also benefited from this. We're benefiting from this. So this is the wilayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah, is the wali, He takes people out of the darknesses into the light, right? Guides them, to this, to His pleasure. And this is an example of it, right? It's not doubt that he had, but what they call istibad. Somebody thought it's, not even far-fetched, but it's just something that, he couldn't picture it, and there it is. Allah made it happen, right? So we'll continue from this point. He said that after, he said that I know Allah can do absolutely anything that's possible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can do it without any effort, right? And he knows this now. Allah ala kulli shayin, over every single thing, Allah has the ability to do it. He's got power over it. He can do whatever he wants. Yeah. So we'll continue from here, inshallah ta'ala. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.
Thank you for listening. This podcast was brought to you by Seeker's Guidance, the Global Islamic Seminary. Visit seekersguidance.org to access reliable Islamic knowledge taught by qualified teachers. We offer a wide range of courses, podcasts, articles, and a world-class answer service. Support us in spreading free, reliable Islamic knowledge to millions around the world by becoming a monthly supporter. Visit seekersguidance.org/donate and make a small monthly commitment today. Our beloved Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, said, "Whoever guides someone to goodness will have a similar reward." So don't forget to share this podcast and spread prophetic guidance.